Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to this slightly delayed lore video in which I'm going to be going through the various elector counts of the Empire. I figured it only fair that after having made a full video about the Emperor Karl Franz himself, I also take a look at his elector count brethren. So, we're going to be starting out with the most interesting of the lot, Marius Leitdorf, the Elector Count of Averland, perhaps one of the finest field marshals to have ever led his army of brawny men into battle against swarms of angry bees, forests, lakes, and half-imaginary fishmen. Marius Leitdorf is a somewhat unbalanced individual, or completely and utterly barking mad, as some would put it. However, he is the good type of insane, or, well, he's the better type of insane, where he has flashes of lucidity in which he is an absolute goddamn genius. He is a fantastic engineer, and has invented quite a few doodahs that have proven to actually be rather effective, and in some cases even work. He is also a pretty damn good statesman, and surprisingly a brilliant politician, in between, speaking to the trees and howling at the moon. And not a bad warrior either, considering that he is prone to bouts of insane rage. You can imagine that, if he's in the proper mood, he's pretty damn dangerous on the battlefield. Now, again, a parallel to our own world. In many cases through our own history, in case of hereditary monarchy, and I remind you again that the elector count is a hereditary position, we have had a fair few rulers throughout our history that have been completely and utterly bonkers. But in many cases, it hasn't actually affected the nation in which they rule to that great of an extent, simply because the vast majority of leaders, of course, have a ton of advisors, they have ministers, they have people doing a lot of their day-to-day business for them. And if these people are competent, then it is not necessarily a crippling thing that their leader is a complete and utter crackpot. However, Marius Leitdorf has a slight problem in this regard, as while he does have quite a few brilliant advisors, and even a few that are not his imaginary friends, his foremost advisor is Daisy Kurt von Hellboring II, who also happens to be his warhorse. So, well, on one hand, you might consider the man insane for talking to his horse and following its advice, but on the other hand, I mean, if you're capable of talking to a horse and drawing valuable technical, mechanical, political, and even military strategic intelligence from the horse, well, you're clearly a brilliant man, because I definitely can't do that, so. If it's stupid but it works, it ain't stupid. However, Marius Leitdorf also has a few problematic incidents under his belt. The most infamous one being when he, for unknown reasons, decided to visit Bretonnia. Now, of course, Bretonians like nobility, and so when the Elector Count was touring the country, he was invited to an official banquet. At this banquet was, amongst other, the Duke of Paravon and his wife. Now, the Duke of Paravon's wife is hands down the ugliest creature to have ever existed in the Warhammer universe. Here we have something that would rival Nurgle on a good day. And, of course, everyone politely ignores this fact because the Duke of Paravon is a powerful man and you don't want to piss him off. But Marius Leitdorf is not other people. And so, during the middle of the banquet, he climbed onto the banquet table, pointed at the Duke of Paravon's troll of a wife, and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Troll, troll, oh Sigma help me, it's a troll." Which, surprisingly enough, seems to have pissed the Duke off ever so slightly. I don't know why, I mean, troll is probably the heftiest compliment that could ever be laden onto that lady, but I digress. So, this led to the Bretonnian invasion of the Empire in 2512, which was thankfully stopped at the defences of Helmgart in Axbite Pass, a rather heavily fortified part of the Empire, because, well, this isn't the first time the Bretonnians have tried to take their summer vacations in the green pastures of the Empire. But, again, Marius got away with it, with a slight reprimand, because, as I said in the video on Karl Franz, even the Emperor cannot just go around throwing elector counts out of their castles. He can't just, take away his position. Basically, because while he does technically have the power to take away his titles, the thing is, if the Empire starts taking away titles from one elector count, the others are probably going to start getting a little bit nervous. And even in the case of Marius Leitov, where they would probably understand, having 9 nervous elector counts surrounding you is a pretty good way to have your skills as a leader questioned, let's just say. However, even Karl Franz, Infinite Patience, was starting to run just a little bit short. Particularly after Marius Leitov decided to declare war on the Moot, the home of the hobbits. Oh, I'm sorry, the halflings that live in the Shire. I fucking hate the halflings. Yes, so, hobbit hatred aside, Marius Leitov decided that the hobbits were not paying their taxes, and he was entirely correct. The halflings were not paying their taxes, deciding that the money was better spent buying more apple pies and growing fatter and lazier rather than paying their betters. In most cases, the hobbits have been tolerated by the various elector counts simply because, well, the halflings are no military threat. They make a halfway decent bodyguard or patrol in many cases. They're surprisingly good archers, which is again part of the whole hobbit nonsense. God, I hate them. And in most cases, they do pay their taxes, if not in the form of good old-fashioned money, then in products like food, which they're pretty damn good at making, being fat little bastards. However, Marius Leitov, as we have already established, is not most people, and so decided to rampage through the Moot, killing and burning whatever the hell he came across until he was finally stopped. By a tribe of ogres, surprisingly enough, because ogres quite like halflings. Granted, they like them even more, likely roasted with an apple in their mouth, but they also have a strange kind of affection for the little creatures beyond just simply being sandwiches. So, the Karl Franz decided that, well, this is probably getting a little bit out of hand, so screw it, nobody really cares about the little hobbits, but he might start burning other people's property soon, and what's worse, he might start burning the property of people that can fight back on a somewhat grander scale, which could definitely lead to some instability in his beloved empire. As such, Karl Franz decided to dispatch his champion Ludwig Schwarzhelm to deal with Marius's excesses. Now, this might seem a rather strange choice. Ludwig Schwarzhelm? It's not a man known for his, what shall we say, political subtlety exactly. He's a bit of a blunt instrument, old Ludwig, but it kind of makes sense. Just think about it for a moment. Okay, so Marius insults Ludwig and tries to throw him out of his castle. Ludwig's probably going to defend himself, and being pretty good at defending himself, there's a reasonable chance he's going to be killing Marius, which problem solved. Or, if Marius simply just refuses him entry or just throws him out of his county, well, now the Emperor has an excuse. Marius Leitov is out of control, he is refusing censor, la-di-la-di-la-di-la. And now he's got a pretty good cause for marching in there with his armies and disposing of him in a legitimate fashion that the other counts can't get too pissy about. But, to everyone's surprise, Marius actually listened to Ludwig, a rather shocking turn of events, really, and started, well, while not completely ignoring, at the very least he started listening more to his human advisors rather than his warhorse. However, sadly, as soon as Marius Leitdorf started to get on the right path to not being an entirely cuckoo clock, he got killed by an orc warlord by the name of Vorgaz Ironjaw during a rather massive warg. Vorgaz himself was shortly afterwards killed by Karl Franz, but it was too late for Marius. And Marius had no children, which leaves the county of Averland in a somewhat precarious position, as his various advisors are now bickering over who is supposed to replace the Mad Count. And to the best of my knowledge, Daisy is not in the running, although that would have been pretty goddamn hilarious. Moving on in a slightly more balanced direction, we have Boris Tordbringer, the Elector Count of Midland, the Graf of Middenheim, Grand Duke of Midland, Prince of Karabberg, Protector of the Dracwald, Warden of the Middle Mountains, and beloved of Ulrich. Graf Boris is a pretty damn good warrior and a brilliant, in fact, statesman, although during the later years of his life he has been suffering from some rather severe bouts of depression, along with perhaps the most inconvenient piece of headgear known in the entirety of the universe, as he's literally carrying a, well, portcullis on his head for reasons that no one can be entirely sure of. Okay, you might argue that it's his coat of arms, yes, but paint it on your bloody shield, moron. Don't wear it on your head. And people think that Marius is crazy. Oh well. Back to the point. Boris Tordbringer is not quite as interesting an individual as Marius, being far more of the basic, competent statesman. He has, however, had a rather considerable grudge against the Beastmen. Now, this is hardly surprising, considering part of his county contains the Dracwald, the biggest, darkest, nastiest piece of forestry to have ever walked the Warhammer world, a universe where forests occasionally do walk. So, this place is infested with bandits, cutthroats, beastmen, chaos worshippers, trolls, ogres, all manners of nasty, and while both Karl Franz and Boris have repeatedly tried to clear the bastards out, well, it's a pretty damn large forest, and there's plenty of places to hide, so they haven't been quite successful just yet. And, well, while Karl Franz is killing beastmen primarily to keep the Empire halfway stable, Boris is killing them more for fun these days after he lost an eye to the beastman Bane Beast Kazarak. Now, this little vendetta has been going on for quite a while, with the two hunting each other in a rather morbid Tom and Jerry fashion around the forest, without either of them having been able to gain a decisive advantage on the other just yet. But both being rather determined individuals, to say the absolute least, there is no doubt that at some point in the future their grudge will be ended, and again, fuck the end times. Boris Tordbringer's other claim to fame is the fact that he has married 3 different women and screwed a few dozen different women, and has fostered enough bastard to raise an army, except he's only recognized 3 of them as his actual children, the rest undoubtedly fathered by gremlins that randomly just sneak into the beds of young women, because, you know, well, he's the Count. You can gainsay him? Of course bloody not. So, his legitimate son, sadly, turned out to be a mouth-breathing moron that, well, he was an invalid completely and utterly, both mentally and physically, so, well, he wasn't much of an heir, and he died of natural causes long before he could inherit anything. And Ironically, his son Heinrich, born to a lady at the court reputedly the day before he married his first wife, Maria, turned out to be a Herculean idol of human perfection, so lucky dice roll. But being an illegitimate bastard, he cannot inherit the Elector Count. But this presents a little bit of a problem, because his second wife, well, she didn't produce any real heirs worthy of mentioning, and his third wife didn't neither, so he's in a little bit of a bind at the moment, where he either has to choose to recognize the little man-god that is Heinrich, or his female daughter Katerina, also born to a lady at the court. And while the Empire is not quite as strict on these things as Britannia, a female Elector Count is still quite unusual, let us just say, so he definitely has a few choices to make before he gets himself killed hunting the Beastmen. And considering that Midland is a rather large and powerful electorate, and considering the sheer amount of religious fanatics that worship Ulrich hanging around in the capital, he had best have a ready line of succession ready before he kicks the bucket. Otherwise, his electoral process for the next one is probably going to be rather dramatic. Then we have Aldenbrand Ludenhof, Grand Baron of Hochland, Marshal of the Tallebecker Reach, Defender of the Shrines, and Baron of Hergig, the Elector Count of Hochland. Aldenbrand strikes a rather unimposing figure, being very tall and thin, but the Count was surprisingly strong considering his somewhat less than impressive frame. He holds court at his palace near Hergig, the capital of Hochland, and the largest city in that particular province, where he spends most of his time indulging in his great passion, that is hunting and hawking, to such an extent that he regularly carries one of his prized hawks into the battlefield. Now, unlike many of his fellow Elector Counts, Aldenbrand Ludenhof is not the up-in-your-face melee fighting type. He is more of a quiet strategist and tactician than he is a brawling fighter, usually leading his armies from the rear in a safe position with a good view of the battle. Now, some of his time would call him a coward for this, but you cannot deny his results, as Aldenbrand has pretty much won every single battle he has participated in. So again, if it seems stupid, but it works, then it's not stupid. We don't know too much more about Aldenbrand Ludenhof, except for the fact that he has a son named Konrad Ludenhof, who is currently being tutored by Erasmus of Newland in the city of Hergig. Next up is Theoderic Gauze, as some of you might remember from the Karl Franz video. He is the Elector Count of Nordland, the Grand Baron of Nordland, Prince of Salzenmund, Lord of Laurel-le-Rhône, or some other such French nonsense, Duke of Marienburg, and Terror of the Norskens. Now, not a whole lot is known about dear old Theoderic, except for the little spaz he had with Karl Franz when he was threatening to invade Hochland in 2516, and the gold wizard Balthasar Gilst turned the vast majority of his gold treasury into lead, and something that he is still ever so slightly miffed about. Now, I did also say that he is the Duke of Marienburg, which technically he is, except for the fact that he is forbidden to enter the city of Marienburg under the pain of death, because, well, he hasn't been very good at making friends in Marienburg, at the absolute least. Partially because his wife decided to have an affair with Harold Dreist, captain of the Nordland Seahawks, partially based out of Marienburg, so, well, you can imagine why he's not particularly keen of that city, and why that particular city is not all that keen on him. Other than that, he's only really known for riding a griffin, which in and of itself is a pretty damn huge accomplishment. Griffins are nasty little critters, and even being able to break one in to the point where you can ride it without the relatively considerable chance of getting gored and eaten by a horse, or, well, in this case, griffin, is a remarkable achievement, but he is one of those characters we don't have that much background lore about, so I will just quietly move along. And we are moving on to Valmir von Raukov, the Elector Count of Ostland, the Grand Prince of Ostland, Margrave of the Northern March, and the Hammer of the East. A bit of a Genghis Khan-looking fellow with a kick-ass black and red colour scheme, Valmir von Raukov is a rather aggressive individual, which he needs to be, considering his realm is under constant threat from Norscan raiders, marauding bands of beastmen, trolls, orcs, giants, cutthroats, bandits, you name it, essentially. Ostland is not the most prosperous of the electorates, simply because, well, it's chocked full of bad people trying to kill and steal whatever the Ostlanders actually manage to bloody produce. But one thing that Valmir himself at least has become pretty damn good at producing is bastards. Valmir gives Boris a run for his money, having produced an undetermined amount of offspring. However, in sharp contrast to Boris, who actually occasionally recognizes one or two of his little bastards, Valmir has made a habit out of ignoring the vast majority of them, having only recognized two legitimate sons, Vasily and Oleg. Now, his favourite son Oleg was unfortunately killed during a chaos incursion, which also made his wife disappear, which is a subject of some speculation, but his eldest son Vasily, and heir apparent, is definitively no slouch himself. So, in many cases, you could say that Ostland is probably one of the more stable electorates simply because it has a ready-made heir that is not a complete and utter mouth-breather, although I'm sure that the Emperor Karl Franz would have preferred if Valmir himself and Vasily, his son, were ever so slightly less warlike, as they have often had uncomfortable levels of ambitions pointing south rather than potentially north. And additionally, Valmir has been the source of a few bouts of political tension between the Empire and Kislev, as, well, Valmir is in many ways a bit of a Kislevite himself, extremely aggressive, pretty damn crazy when it comes to, well, fighting, loving, and all of that nonsense, and was also said to have seduced a Kislevite ambassadress, which is a slight problem, because, well, you don't really want your ambassadors to be screwing the local gentry, now would you, for fairly obvious reasons. Then we have another more or less unknown Elector Count in the form of Wolfram Herzvig, the Elector Count of Ostmark, Chancellor of the League of Ostmark, and Prince of Bechenhafen. Now, one little note, Ostmark, I like to call it Ostmark simply because, well, cheese, and I like cheese, but it is also quite possible that it means Ostmark, in the more German pronunciation of Ost, but, well, I'll leave that up to your imagination. As I have said previously, Reichsspiel is not German, although it does in many cases sound German, so. The Elector Count of Ostmark is most known, or, well, it's not a good bit of fame, really, for the Battle of Hertwig's Folly. So, already you know this is not going to be a particularly flattering story. This happened in 2485 when he was a teenager. He refused to allow the much more experienced Grand Master Kessler of the Knights of the Everlasting Light Order to command his army in his stead. In return, the Grand Master Kessler decided that he's going to pick up his ball and go home, and withheld his troops from the battle. A rather cuntish move, yes, but nevertheless, it was effective in teaching a lesson, as the young Wolfram escaped over the battle just barely with his life intact. And that's pretty much all we know about Wolfram Herzvig. The only other piece of information comes from the thrice cursed end times, where he got killed at the Battle of Alderfen by a champion of Nurgle, although it must be said that little Wolfram did also manage to kill the champion in return with his rune fang. We also do know that he was a griffin rider, so at the very least he was not a completely incompetent individual, although we can't say too much about the poor little bastard as we simply don't have that much information about him. And then, lastly, we're going to finish up with three that we know very little about. Albrecht Haupt Anderson, who we know virtually nothing about, the Elector Count of Stirland, and Helmut Feuerbach, the Elector Count of Talaböckland, who we also know virtually nothing about. All we know about him is that he's currently missing, and that's about it. And lastly, we have someone slightly unusual, but that we also sadly don't know a whole lot about. Emmanuella von Liebwitz. And as you might have already realized from the name, this is in fact not a man, which is shocking, I know. It is the only Elector Countess currently in office, so to say, the Elector Countess of Wiesenland. The Lady Majoress, which I'm not entirely sure what her title is or how it is pronounced, honestly, and Chancellor of the University of Newland. She is also the Duchess of Meissen. So, as you might have already realized, she is essentially the ruler of the semi-independent city-state of Newland, although, of course, it is also part of the Empire, and Emmanuella, being an imperial elector, is clearly not entirely independent of Karl Franz's goings and whereabouts. The only thing we really know about Emmanuella is, interestingly enough, about her younger brother, the Viscount Leos von Liebwitz, who died under unclear circumstances, and, well, in this case, it's kind of hard to suspect his older sister, because he was considered a master swordsman who had fought several duels to defend the honor of his older sister against various slanderous remarks, so it seems a bit odd that she would want to kill the little bastard, but in imperial politics, everything is possible, I suppose. Then again, people dying in the Warhammer world is nothing unusual, so it might actually be one of those rarest of deaths in a politically intrigued universe, an accidental one. And that has been all of the current Elector Counts of the Empire. The three last one that technically kind of used to be Elector Counts in the provinces that are now, well, gone. It would be Eldred, the Elector Count of Solund, which was slain by the Orc warlord Gorbed Ironclaw, and his province was later annexed by Wiesenland. And Vilne or Conrad Aldebrecht. It is a little bit unclear as we have some contrasting sources. The Elector Count of Drakwold, which was later divided between Midland and Nordland. Now, you can also technically argue that there would be an Elector Count of Marienburg, and indeed there was some grumblings about having Marienburg become an independent electorate rather than now the independent city-state that it currently is, but, well, it's kind of hard to even make a real guess at who would have been that Elector Count, so I shan't mention it too much. So, I've kind of torn through a lot of Warhammer lore now, as I'm pretty sure you've noticed, so I figured I'd just start taking a few requests. If there's anything in particular you would like me to do a video on, then do please add a suggestion in the comments and I'll look it over. If not, I'm just going to ramble on about various other subjects that catch my fancy. And we are, as I'm sure you're aware, closing in on 10,000 subscribers when I will have a little bit of a lore surprise for you all. Until then, I have been Arch, thank you very much for listening, and hope to see you soon. Have a good day.